Hi, good morning. I don't really know how this video is going to turn out because I never like to write an outline or to prepare anything for that matter. And sometimes I find that when I speak, the videos just kind of take on a mind of their own and they often go in places I don't anticipate. They often end up in a way that I don't expect. It's like once I start recording and it starts flowing, then we'll see where we end up. I don't know where we're gonna end up. But that's part of the exciting thing. It's just trying to get in the flow and see where one thought leads to another, leads to another. The more difficult part about that is sometimes I feel I miss a couple points that I wanted to talk about, but that's where I always go back and I'll fill that in the description or in a future post if it's on, one of those social media channels. But I do prefer recording this way to just letting the conversation flow. Well, one-sided conversation. I like to let it flow to where it wants to go. And that's just fate, I guess. What gets revealed or expressed, it's no longer in my hands. That's how I feel about it. But anyway, today's topic is going to be about sex. Is it ironic that somebody like me who wanted to be a nun so badly is talking so much about sex and dispensing sex advice? You would think that the two are totally unrelated, right? Trying to be a nun and sex. But the thing is, I didn't get to be a nun. I got married, so sex is actually very relevant to my life. And to be quite honest, I don't even enjoy or have that much interest in talking about sex. That's not one of the topics that gets me really excited. But the reason why I continue to talk about it is because every time I mention something, I can see more and more of the shame and just all of the negative feelings that arise when I talk about it. And that's one thing I kind of want to burst. That's kind of a myth I feel I want to dispel because I don't believe having sex with your husband is shameful. So the more I talk about it and the more I see that resistance there, the more I feel like that topic is not finished. That I need to go into it more and kind of just see why there is so much of this hesitation, resistance, and overall it's like an obstacle to journey through. So that's the reason why I've been talking about it more, because I don't feel like we're at a place that I'm comfortable enough to move on with it. So in this video, I'm going to try to talk about everything I have left to say about this topic. Now, where should I start? Well, I would like to start in my childhood regarding sex and how I viewed it when I was little. So I remember that I mentioned this before, but my parents never really talked about sex to me. And let's see. So when I was little, my parents took the stance. They were very protective, so they would always take the stance to me regarding my body is that you need to protect your body and you don't let anyone get close to your body. Don't let anybody touch you. It's very bad. It's very bad to let anyone, get close to you or touch you. And they would even drill me with certain exercises like, oh, what if there was a man who said, hey little girl, come here, I'll give you some candy if you take off your panties. And they would drill me like, oh, what are you gonna say? Are you gonna give them, are you gonna do that for them in order to get candy? And I don't know if my answer was yes or no, but then they would be like, no, you absolutely can't. These people can take you away or do something bad to you. So it was a lot of that being drilled into my head that I just really had to keep myself safe and stay away from the other gender, and letting anyone touch me was very bad and horrific. So as a young girl, and I think during those years I was pretty dutiful, and I listened to what was expected of me. So I kind of took that to heart, and I was very cautious, and I didn't let anyone get too close, and most certainly I did not, take off my panties for ice cream or candy or anything like that. I was very aware of that. And at the same time, whenever we would watch movies as a family, my family really loved to watch movies. And sometimes there would be like a sort of intimate scene between a man and a woman. And my mom would always grunt in disgust, like, oh, she would have that just very strong reaction. Or if there was any way that was insinuated that these two people would spend the night together or be in bed, then she would often make comments like, oh, yuck, why do they have to show that? Or, oh, it's too soon. Or, she would always have some kind of very disgusted remark. And so as a young child, being around this kind of culture, I would feel like, oh, yuck, that's so gross, it's so bad, it's so dirty, it's so shameful, especially coming from your own mother, who seems to have such a high regard for being noble and being honorable. And she was a teacher, she really abided by rules. And so really having ingested this kind of attitude towards sex or being intimate, I didn't even know it was sex as a child. They would just show that two people were going to the bedroom, and then the light would turn off, and then it would cut away to a different scene, but anything kind of remotely close to showing two people getting intimate was to me a very bad thing, a very disgusting thing. Now fast forward to when I was 10, I was in 5th grade, and one day, unbeknownst to me, our grade level was having a sex education day. Now that was the very first time that I was exposed to the idea of a man and a woman having sex in terms that were that explicit. Like, they would actually show us kids, they would show about the penis going into the vagina, and they would talk about all of this whole process, which I remember me and a couple friends, we were so innocent, and we couldn't believe that our parents would do something that disgusting or that shocking. So I remember we went to our teacher after the presentation, and we were like, there is no way our parents did that. It's impossible. There's no way that they would have had sex like we were shown. And the teacher was like, well, I don't know your parents, but in order to have kids, I'm pretty certain this process took place. So anyway, after that sexual presentation at school, it was almost a feeling of betrayal, because my whole life growing up, it was like, from my parents, sex is bad, or like, boys are bad, boys are bad, boys are bad, don't get anywhere close. And then all of a sudden, one day at school, you're like, what the fuck? Like, my parents are having sex, or they're doing that act? And it was like so unbelievably shocking, and it was so, almost like they had tricked me, almost like they had deceived me. And it wasn't a good feeling. It wasn't I don't even know how to express what was felt at the time, but it was just like, just a great feeling of being deceived. Yeah, or not being, that they were not honest with me. So, they were trying their best, and, maybe, who knows, maybe their way was good and that they protected me from having any bodily harm done to me. But there's a part of me that was not 100% satisfied with the delivery of this subject, which is why, and another thing is, my parents grew up in a culture where where sex was viewed as something extremely shameful, which is probably why they had that certain approach to sex, which is to not talk about it or to refrain from giving any information about it. And maybe they thought, oh, one day when the time comes, then they'll have to partake in that. But there was just a lot of shame surrounding sex, and that definitely got translated into me as a young person. It wasn't my parents' fault, or it wasn't my mom's fault. That was just the upbringing that she had. That was just the culture that she was seeped in, where sex was so shameful and nobody spoke of it. That was her world. So I think largely, I do feel that really shaped my experience about sex growing up. I considered it extremely dirty, and I even feel that might have been a part to play in my choice to become a nun. Because once you start getting into religion and then you learn about the nuns, and in terms of viewing life as dirty or clean, the nuns are the most pure and clean that you could ever achieve, right? If you're not familiar with nuns, I'm going to talk about, there's different sects, not sex, but there's different sects of nuns. And for my particular sect, the women were made to live in a temple. There would be no men in the temple, strictly women, and they would be studying religious texts every day and discussing spiritual values. But the most important thing, if we are to talk about sex, is that there is no sexual activity taking place in the temple. Nuns are celibate. That means they do not have sex. And in fact, for my particular sect, there were a ton of vows that one would have to abide by. And one of those vows, you cannot even look at men. You should not look at men at all. You keep your glance down. And to even look at a man would transgress your vow. So anyway, imagine preparing for nunhood for over 10 years and training yourself to really disengage from the opposite sex. And also after having a lifetime of this training from your parents, whereas sex is so shameful. And after I didn't become a nun, I got married. Then where did that leave me in a married state? So after having this lifetime of training and of trying to stay away from sex and thinking it's dirty, and after training to become a nun, which heightens that experience even more, where you try to make yourself so clean that you don't even look at the opposite gender. And after this door was not open to me and I had to get married, and guess what? What does being married entail? It entails having sex. So where did that leave me after I was in this period? Well, I'll tell you. After I got married, I was still, number one, reeling from the sadness of not becoming a nun, which I felt was my dream at the time. So first of all, I felt like I was not living my optimal life because I was not living a life of so-called purity. Second, I was living a worldly life with my husband, and at the time I thought that was lesser than, because I was so having my hopes high on living that spiritual life and flying off into the clouds or whatever. But here I was, grounded in this very homely experience of living with a romantic partner, which I, in the back of my mind, kind of viewed as sinful, but that I had kind of no other choice because the life I wanted was not open to me. So I was living a sinful life, and on top of that, I was having a sexual life, which I felt was such a struggle between what I wanted before and what was happening now. It was like a battle every time between being clean and being dirty, and I had to choose between the life I wanted and the life my husband wanted. So as a result, there was that everyday battle between myself and what I felt was good or bad. Oh, Teddy! Are you... yeah, sorry about that interruption. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so I was talking about living the married life and having the struggle. Me personally, just coming from this nun world and then coming down into this married world. So I was talking about the struggle that I would face every time I had intercourse, because the worlds were just too different. I had come from one world only to be dropped in the other world, and it was just so hard to merge the two, and I hadn't reconciled the worlds. So every time my husband wanted to go and have sex, I felt like I was transgressing my nun vows. And I wasn't even a nun, but in my mind I had been so prepared and so trained to become a nun that there was that internal struggle every time. As a result, I would never initiate sex. I would never enjoy sex. How could I? How could I, given my almost 30 years of training with this topic and the shame that had encrusted me all around me my whole life? I never enjoyed sex. I viewed it, I adopted my mom's thinking about sex, seeing that it was so disgusting, so shameful. So I never wanted to touch sex. I always hoped that my husband would forget about it. I hoped that he would be too tired and not want to have sex. It was just something I never wanted to partake in. In essence, I had sexual dysfunction in my marriage, and it led to my husband not being very happy with me. It was always a point of contention. We would fight about that subject, and my husband would not have his needs met, not in the least, because I never wanted to go to bed with him. Now, one day, I woke up, and I woke up to the idea of, why is sex so shameful? It is so shameful in our society. If you talk to nearly any woman, us women are given this sex ed that is just shame, so much shame. Even a lot of the people I talked to, their upbringing was very similar to mine, in that their parents told them all the, regarding the topic of sex, it was just like, don't have it, don't do it, don't ever get close to it. That was our education. So as a society and having this much shame, there is a ton of sexual dysfunction in marriages. This affects marriages 100%, which is why I feel the need to talk about it, because my interest and my area of research is marriage. And so this is all related. Having this kind of upbringing myself, as a society, women are put in this upbringing, and this leads to a lot of sexual dysfunction in society. Oh. All right, sorry about the disruption again. Just one of the things about having 4 kids. Bless them for just giving me the time to step away and make this video. I think it really is important enough to warrant some time away from the kids to just really speak about this topic. So where was I again? Okay, so yeah, there was just this overall buildup of shame in women towards sex in our society. Now, one day I woke up and I was like, what in the freaking, like, why is there so much shame around sex? Why is that? What makes sex shameful if you're doing it with your husband? What is so shameful about that act? And I couldn't really think of an answer. Why? Why has society made this to be so disgusting? Why? Is feeling horny a sin? I remember I once mentioned in a post that I was too innocent as a kid to ever care about pleasuring myself or exploring my body or masturbating, to put it quite openly. But that, although that was mostly true, that was not completely true, because after I wrote that post, a memory surfaced. I remember one time I was in my parents' room and I was a little, this was after the sex ed, and this was after some things had happened where I was a little curious about my body. And before that point, I had never really explored my body or to even know what's down there. So I remember one day I simply wanted to know what it looked like down there and what kind of holes I had down there, because I had learned about women having certain holes in the vagina. So I remember going to my parents' room, and I remember they have like this closet, and they have mirrors on the closets. So it's this giant full-length mirror, and I remember opening my legs in front of this mirror without any clothes on down there. And I remember using a Q-tip and just trying to poke around. Is this too much info? I'm sorry. I mean, I'm just being completely honest. So I was using a Q-tip and trying to poke around the holes down there to see what in the heck, people were talking about, and trying to figure out like what my body is like. I was curious, and if I'm perfectly honest, throughout either my middle school years or high school years, yeah, there were times where I felt horny. I mean, is that a sin? Is that something to be ashamed of? I don't think I intentionally meant to feel horny, but it was just a natural occurrence where sometimes I was like, oh, I like feel something different about my body and it wants to do something and I don't understand it, but that feeling was there. So my question to you is feeling horny a sin? Or is it natural? Or is it natural? I never pursued that feeling of horniness. I mean, not that much, just because of everything I had detailed before. But, I mean, I imagine I suppressed that natural feeling, but is that natural feeling a sin? Is that sinful to feel the feeling of horniness? Is it? So fast forward to not that long ago, I woke up one of these days and I was like, oh my gosh, After that time when I woke up, I'm not really sure what happened, but all of a sudden, it's like all of my past notions fell away. And one day I woke up and I experienced for the first time where I was feeling, oh my gosh, sex is actually pleasurable. And I had never felt that before that point. But for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, sex is actually a pleasurable thing. And that was the first time that idea had come up. And I was kind of intrigued and fascinated. And from that point on, all the shame had just fallen away. And I realized that why had I been so entrenched in shame my whole life when it's such a pleasurable thing to do with my husband? It's such an intimate and connecting thing, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to do with my husband. And it wasn't until I had that one experience where I found it very pleasurable that I was like, why did I allow myself to be seeped in all the shame all this time? He's my husband, and this is a very natural act between a man and a woman in nature. This is how babies are created. There's nothing more natural than two humans making another life, which is probably what the function of humans are, to make more life, to procreate and create more humans. That is the function of the human body. He has a penis, I have a vagina, and together we make a child. That is the function of our bodies. That is the role of the man, female. We have different genitalia, and those come together to create life. So what is more sacred than that experience? To create life, and also to share that physical love, that intimacy with your partner, whom you are choosing to create that life with. What is there to be ashamed about? Why is there shame around sex? Why? To me, there is no reason. There is no longer a reason to be ashamed of sex. No longer. As long as I'm not promiscuous and I'm not throwing my body out there for anyone to just, hey, come have sex with me, or if I'm not harming myself in that sexual way, but if I'm guarding my body and I've kept very close vigilance of my body, and I'm now married, then now at this point, there is no shame. There is no shame in it. And in fact, my husband probably needs me to have more sex with him than I'm giving him. Because as a woman, I'm not that accustomed, and I don't have that testosterone. I'm not constantly in that state of wanting to have sex, but he probably is. So, wherever I'm at right now, I probably need to vamp it up more and pay more attention to his needs and to have more sex. And that's the advice that I want to give you as whom I call a married nun. What would the married nun say to you is to have more sex. My guess is that you, and if you're a woman, you're probably not having enough sex with your husband. And that is hurting your husband, who has a very tangible need, and that is causing a dysfunction in your marriage. So my advice to you is to have more sex and to not feel the shame. Get rid of the shame. The shame is not necessary. The shame no longer serves you. It is not shameful. It is natural, and in fact, it is sacred and it is beautiful and it is holy in your marriage. I'm getting chills while I'm talking about this. Hopefully, that means I'm on the right track. So, anyway, I just had to put that message out there because there's too many of us that have been living under that cloud of shame, and it is doing nothing but hurting everybody. And so, I just really wanted to dispel that and to tell you freaking have more sex.